Welcome to Out of the Blue, a podcast about the great things that are being done in research and education within the TU Delft. And we are now at the Pulse building near our Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering. And I'm talking to Jasper van Kuijk, Assistant Professor of User-Centered Innovation still, right?
Right.
And do you the word innovation makes my hairs go different directions?
So why?
Yeah. Sometimes innovation seems like innovation for innovations.
Yeah. Basically, if I'm asked to give a presentation somewhere on innovation, I usually say, well, it's pretty much recommendable not to innovate because the risk of failure is really high, the cost is really high. So innovation has become sort of a buzzword. Anyone who says innovation can get extra subsidies or get money from your boss, and then they have no clue what they're doing.
So you're an assistant professor in innovation who advises people not to do innovation.
In many situations, it's better to do incremental innovations. And I think that in most, what people think of when they think innovation is like Tesla. Oh, we're going to be Tesla, with very high rewards, but also very high risks of failure. I think one of the examples in consumer electronics is that, for example, Nokia for a long time was really good at reusing their user interface across phones and across over generations and slightly improving it every time. Apple does pretty much the same thing. Reusing usage patterns, reusing user interfaces that work. And so not innovating for innovation's sake, but innovating where you need to innovate because you're lagging behind or because the competition is doing better. I think Tesla is a really interesting example. If they would have done a combustion engine, first of all, Elon Musk didn't want that. But secondly, no way you're going to compete with Volkswagen and Ford with a combustion engine. With something new.
Yeah, so you can do radical innovation if you within a company. It is a high-risk game, but then the reward comes with the incremental innovations after that. Do you think that is the idea?
I think that Donald Norman and Roberto Vaganti have made a very interesting case for the interplay between radical steps in innovation, so a meaning or technology change, for example, switch from one technology to the next. In Holland, we have the OV chip card, now the electronic ticketing system. We used to have paper tickets. That was a radical change from one technology to the next, from paper to a digital system. The risk that you then run is that the usability or the user experience of such a system goes down because you lose experience and knowledge about what people want and how it should work. So for acceptance of the new system, you want it actually to be straight from the start more usable than its predecessor. And that requires a huge investment in user-centered design. So finding out, okay, this new technology, how should we use it? How should we apply it? So I think that risk of doing something that's under par is very big for bigger organizations and bigger systems, and less so for example, startups who can find a niche group of users who will love their minimum viable product and accept that the user experience is not that good yet.
Yeah, so because let's step back. So we've already touched on a couple of topics that's part of your career. So you graduated here at the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering with Philips on a new lighting.
Yeah.
And so the Philips Hue is basically you're like the grandfather.
No. Well, no. I graduated within the Philips research laboratories in the ambient intelligent lighting project, and that was a cooperation between Philips Lighting and Philips Research. And the goal was to develop new interactive smart lighting concepts. And at the time there was no colored LED. It was not yet possible in a commercial setting, and this notion of ambient intelligence came about. That's everywhere around us we will have intelligent devices, machines, systems, and they will be connected and we'll interact with them maybe even through gestures. So this was 2001.
Gestures.
That gestures has always been the dream, and speech control as well. But So basically what we did was do studies on what do people want from lighting, how do they use it in the home, what scenarios can we think of, and then we presented those to people. And out of that project was one of the products that came out of it was the Ambilight television. Yeah. That was not my graduation project, but I helped in the front end research phase. By the way, the prototype of the ambient lighting TV was actually a setup with multiple light speakers across the room. Yeah. Philips had that in, and they played a scene from Independence Day where the big dish UFO comes over the city, but first the light speakers in the back of the room went off, then the light speakers underneath the couch went off, then the light speakers in the corner of the room went off, and then only behind the television, and then you saw the UFO coming into the... So you could have a whole scenario with light actually flashing. And
you call them light speakers?
Light speakers.
Oh, okay, wow.
And that was toned down way into the ambient lighting television. But the origin was, I think, far cooler and also far more hard to exploit commercially. My concept, on the other hand, and so after the front-end user research phase, I started on something I called info lights. And there was a notion from MIT Media Lab called calm technology. So this was 2001 and already...
Mark Weiser, right?
Mike Weiser, and already people were worrying about information overload. So there were no PDAs, or we weren't using smartphones or laptops to the extent that we're doing it now, but they were already saying there's a danger of information overload. We should have devices and machines that interact in a sort of natural way that you read information from without accessing a screen. Yeah. My mentor at Philips, Elmo Diederichs, he always used the analogy of a drip filter coffee machine. A drip filter coffee machine has a song. It starts up, and then at the end you hear sort of, and you know,
From that
your
sound,
coffee is done. Intuitively, you don't make the decision, but you walk towards the machine, you grab your coffee without a beep, without it saying it's done. So it's much more of a sort of a dance or an intuitive interaction. That was what we wanted with info lights. So I had this lamp based on the wobble lamp from MIT Media Lab, and then sort of extended on that. What could you use? Motion, color, sound, and then I added RFID tags to that. So you could put a different service in it. And one of the services was traffic alert. For example, if you come down in the morning, you put your driving route to work into the interface, and then you put the car RFID tag in. If you come down, you see it's green, it's orange, or it's red. So if it's red, you have to find an alternative. Orange, you have to check. Green, go.
Yeah. So that's actually what you can do now with U lights if you program it wisely.
Yeah, you can actually, in the back end, you can actually make this. So the idea, it was not a physical product, but you can have a warning system. You can do that. That's really cool.
I think when I bought my U light, do you have U lights at home? No, I of course thought that.
So why did you think that?
Well, so I bought the U lights, and the first thing I did is I made a traffic thing out of it, and of course it broke because if this then that and then then that. And why did I think you didn't have it? Because you basically do innovate, but then you sort of go, why should I do this? I don't need this.
Well, I have a very low tolerance threshold for crap. And if you do stuff like that, you spend a lot of time on something that you're not going to use. And I don't have so much time. So I'm never the first guy to update to the new OS. I wait, let other people solve my problems. It's interesting, by the way, with info lights, I tested it in Philips Home Lab, where they had this really, one of the first companies to have this test situation.
Yeah, sort of a real home. Yeah.
And participants came in and they said, "Oh wow, this is so cool!" And said, "What do you like about it?" Colored lighting, amazing. And that was it. The whole information overload thing, not yet an issue. The services thing, not recognized.
Let's do colored light.
Let's do. So my assignment was find out advanced One of my earlier concepts, do retrofit colored lighting, but then we said, yeah, it doesn't meet the criteria of something really ambient intelligent like. So basically we scrapped Philips Hue and did info lights.
But now with Philips Hue, as it progresses, you can now even sort of have Netflix control your Hue light. So basically we could now do what...
It's for a very limited part of the population. I think as long as programming it is still programming it, and even with if this then that, etc., it's still very limited. It has to be extremely user-friendly before you can ramp up a large user group, I think.
Yeah. And so that takes me to your PhD thesis. You worked for a while for different companies, but then you came back for your PhD, and that was about usability in companies, how they, in consumer electronics, right?
Yeah, well, I call them electronic consumer products because consumer electronics sounds like DVD players. That's a specific category. I call it electronic consumer products because it also includes white goods and basically anything electronic for consumers, like washing machines, dishwashers, DVD players, home cinema sets, anything.
And you didn't look specifically at the interfaces themselves, but how it was being made within organizations.
So yeah, basically my question was, if there's so much theory on how to do user-centered design, usability engineering, human-centered design, how come still crappy products come out? Then apparently either the theory is wrong, or the theory is not used in practice, or it doesn't fit practice, or what's going on. So basically I went into practice and I interviewed product development teams, and not just focused on the user experience person, but also talked to the product manager, mechanical engineering, product planning, marketing, and asked everyone, like, so how do you go about developing these new products? To what extent are you user-centered? And what should I do if I have to make something user-centered? What prevents you from making something user-centered?
What are the
barriers?
Yeah.
The barriers and enablers. Basically, that was I was looking at things that make it easier and things that make it harder to make usable products.
And what were the main thresholds? So what was keeping it back? So let's assume that everybody wanted to make usable products.
Yeah,
right?
that's sort of for most companies an intention. It also depends how high they prioritize this, depending on how much they see commercial benefits or not. That was one thing, the attitude of the company as a whole, that really determined whether they had a big in-house user experience group and whether teams accepted feedback from user tests or not. One really interesting thing in terms of product design is that I asked all product developers, what should I not do when making usable products? Everyone said, cram all the features into it that you can, because there's two downsides to that. One, it becomes a harder to use product if it has more functions. It's hard, take a bowl with 2 marbles, it's really easy to find the blue one. Take a bowl with 200 marbles, a lot harder. Yeah. And you can mitigate that by infusing a lot of design effort. The iPhone is a really usable smartphone. The smartphones before it were much harder to use, but the functionality is roughly the same. They added basically mostly a different design to that. That was the other downside. So a more complex product in terms of functionality is usually harder to use without putting in more design effort. And here comes the other thing. You have to put in more design effort, and you have a limited amount of people, amount of hours, etc. So each function you put in makes a product harder, and it makes your work as a product development team harder.
So basically, you are of course talking sort of the Don Norman featureitis, putting too much features into something from a sort of a user-centered perspective. But as you mentioned with the startups, it's also about sort of starting with a minimum viable product, right? True. So do you believe that is they're totally spot on there, or are there issues with the notion of an MVP, minimum viable product?
No, but the notion of a minimum viable product is really accurate. It just depends what minimum viable is, depending on your user group and your product. So if you're going to make a new system for remote surgery, your minimum viable product is a very high entry, high quality product that has been certified. Maybe you want to do just one or two, so you can monitor it all the time, etc. If you do an app for software developers, mostly in the beginning, that don't mind much user experience, they're not really advanced, but it gives them a functionality that they really appreciate. It solves a problem that everyone has. Yeah, maybe you have something.
Yeah. And so, if you out of your research, there came sort of recommendation cards that everybody was given, and sort of things that you can do. Some of them didn't age very well.
Which one do you
So control your sales channel. Well, it doesn't try before you buy. So it was very much retail oriented.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. It's not about aging, but sort of it's different now, right?
It's different. So the point of control your sales channel was not just having stores, but for example, put your product in a store so that people can experience it. If it has really a good user experience, what happens or happened in a lot of stores was that people would hide the remote control of the television so you couldn't experience it. A problem, for example, with a washing machine, you can never try it out in the store, hardly ever. Or you should be in, for example, one of these Miele or Siemens experience centers. There was a second thing is that I think Apple did this pretty well, is that one time they discovered that salespeople would not explain the benefits of a more expensive Apple computer over a cheaper PC. And at one point decided, okay, then we're going to sell it ourselves and point out what we think is right about it. So that remains, but online purchasing has really, really changed this.
Now, so still the sales channel is very important, but so especially the photos made them look sort of outdated. So try before you merge buy and try in retail. Of course, they look outdated, but the basic message is still there. The other thing is don't let designers do their thing. Why not?
Well, it depends on which word you stress, because I think this one is don't let designers do their thing. And I saw sort of a dichotomy in designers. The designers that want to make something cool in terms of user interfaces or products, and the designers who want to make something that works for users. And the designers who want to make something that works for users, who take their pride in that, don't do their thing, they do the user's thing. However, there are also designers who want to think, but I think this is cool, I think this is an innovative concept, and things like, I'm really not interested in that opinion when it comes to user interfaces.
So they basically put their opinionated software, right? Sort of opinionated products.
I think it should work like this. Okay, that's really interesting, but what do your users say? Did you test it with people? And I think that's sort of, I think the persona for designers should not be Philip Stark or any star designer. It should be Alfred, which is Batman's butler. Who is someone who's always right. He always says the right thing. If Bruce Wayne does something silly, he tells him, you're not doing the right thing. But he's sort of in the background, modest, but he still has an opinion, but it's based on an analysis thing instead of, being
ego.
The ego.
But what you can think of the designers doing, so if I think of myself as designers doing their thing, it is doing something and then sort of being delighted by what people do with it. So that's my notion of
but then it seems that you are then one of those designers who are triggered by people being happy with that's what you strive for. But there's a whole bunch of designers designing from another perspective who have a different background, different attitude.
But then it still can have some ego in there, right? Or is that not allowed?
Sure. I think it doesn't mean that you should put yourself,
No, so Alfred sort of associates me with sort of somebody who sort of doesn't count himself as important, whereas he cares about. He is important, but he doesn't put himself in the front. And I think that's a lot of industrial and interaction and user experience designers are these type of people. A lot of people don't know all these software designers, interaction designers, or automotive designers because they work in teams, and it's not about their ego; it's about their team. Everyone has their contribution. But I've also seen
some designers with an attitude that say like, if they would give us the company, everything would be okay. And I think that designers would sort of be the last people I would give the company to.
Very good. I agree with that.
Really most interesting things that when I started, I thought that this would be about knowledge, because all of the literature on user-centered design is about doing front-end user research, testing your concepts. There was a lot of evaluation of user testing methods, so testing user testing methods in academia, and a lot of critique on that. And I went into practice and found out that really often teams already knew what was wrong, but one, it was not accepted by the highest people in the team or by the rest of the team. So for example, a designer or a user experience specialist said,
brought in at the last?
No, earlier on. They would say, this is going to be a problem. No one accepted it, and then it came out of the user test, and everyone said, maybe it is a problem, but now it's too late. Or even worse, they say, but you have the wrong participants, let's go to the market anyway. So the thing is, the knowledge is there, but there was one issue that was getting it across, other people accepting either your expertise or your knowledge. A second was, even if it was accepted, the knowledge really often came in at such a late stage, so tooling was done. So for your injection molding, the PCBs had already been made, the electronics was done, the whole system was done. Basically, you could only change the labels next to the buttons.
And the manual.
And maybe the manual. And time again, that turned out to be the biggest challenge. So what in the end I did was recommendations for take this generational approach, what you mentioned in the opening that Apple does and that Nokia did. Develop over generations and develop in cohorts, not just one product that uses the same interface, but 5, because then you learn 5 times as fast. Stuff like that, I think that's the real genius of developing user-centered industrial products.
But then you also said that most of these products, usually it's sort of, so what you're pointing at is these are organizational issues as well, right?
Yeah, there are. Design is an organizational thing. You can't do it by yourself as a designer. I think
and maybe a cultural thing as well, or
within this organizational culture. Yeah, very much so. For example, if the culture is that we only accept knowledge if it comes from N is 5,000, so a really big market researchers often have trouble with user tests, because it's, how do you know from 5 participants that this is actually the case? Well, and then I usually ask, so, okay, if we only tested 5 participants and 3 out of 5 had this issue, how big is the chance that 5,000 people will not have this issue? The difference is that we're not looking for statistical distributions, but we're looking for problems. And with problems, it's more of a black swan thing. If you see one, you only need to see one to show that it's there. And there's quite a lot of interesting research on how many participants you need, but that's sort of a cultural thing that you see in some companies, very quantitative-oriented culture, versus more qualitative design-like culture. That's one thing. But it's also like...
There's also taste, right? So a company comes from a culture and has a certain notion of how things need to be done. This is how
do you see in terms of process or in terms of styling?
Styling as well, but also so I know Randstad, which is a famous example. They wanted to implement Scrum, but they didn't allow for boards with sticky notes because that's not the way it should look. We have a clean desk policy here.
That's going to be very hard. On the other hand, for example, ING Bank, they switched completely from, which was a very hierarchical structure. For them, software development started with Scrum, and now the whole company in the Netherlands does it. And I think that's a really radical change. That also needs a cultural change.
So I think at Randstad they're also doing the cultural change. No problem.
You have to. But another thing is, for example, in terms of how you design an organ, that's basically my research about how to make an organization or process that is able to make user-centered or usable products. That's my question. How do I set up a team, an organization and a process that can do this? Because it's not just about the knowledge, it's about getting that product to the market. Basically, a user test doesn't make a product any more usable.
No.
If nothing gets implemented from the user test, it's useless. And that's what happens in so many cases. So I started looking for what are ways to prevent that from happening.
So I like the one where you say apply usability guerrilla techniques.
Yeah, that's not my term. That's from Nielsen Norman. But I really, yeah, that's it. You know, early on testing, a few participants because
cheap,
simple, early on. But here I found with one company where I did the case study was very interesting. Then I said, well, why do you test so late? Because they only tested with the first samples of the product. Then they would do a user test. So they started up the production line and made, or really not the production line, but really early working samples. And then he said, well, you know, if I test with a dummy product or a dummy interface, the team will not believe the results. And if you're talking about culture, this is then you have a really, really big problem because then you can never test early and you can never prevent problems from occurring.
Yeah, so then they see them as undermining sort of their designs. The user testers are undermining the design.
That was one thing, and it was also a perception of when is something true. If you don't have real users in the real context with the real products, the outcome of this test cannot be true, cannot have no predictive value, so we'll just ignore it. Another interesting one was where a company had obliged everyone to do a user test before going to market. So there was a really important test. If your product failed that test, it would not be launched. And there was this one product that failed the test with some of the primary use cases. So what then happened was first the team got angry because they saw 2 years of work going down the drain. Then the boss started pressuring the user experience specialist who was sort of semi-outside. Can you change the results because this is going to be dramatic? She said, no, I'm not going to do this. It's just the primary use cases, the one that you put on the box are not good enough. And then the boss said, okay. And then in the end, the team decided to downgrade the primary use case to a secondary use case, not put it on the box, and they launched the product.
And that was tested or not?
It was, no. So that the results of the test, it wasn't tested again.
Oh.
So it just said, oh, our primary use case sucks. Good, we'll make it a secondary use case. Now we can launch.
Oh, man.
So this is, so you can put all the tick boxes in the process that you want. If the culture is not right, people are going to circumvent.
And that's so nice because after that, you took sort of this knowledge and you started within our faculty a research group that looked at OV payment, so the public transport payment.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about an organization where you wouldn't expect sort of good user-centered design, that would be sort of that, right?
So if consumer electronics and electronic consumer products are pretty tough environments to be in terms of time pressure, budgetary pressure, etc. The OV chip card that I studied, that was hell.
Yeah.
Because it was not one development organization, but 12 transport agencies together having to decide how to do electronic ticketing in the Netherlands. 12 transport agencies, 12 provinces, the Dutch national government, and then somewhere were some user organizations who were trying to say, yeah, but we really don't like the way it's going. Yeah. And that was multi-stakeholder service innovation.
Yeah, but there was sort of a real sort of, if you now would ask people, hey, would you want to go back to paper? No. So there is it's like the flat panel display, right? Nobody wants to go back.
But let's go back to 2008 when they introduced the system. That was 2 years before my PhD defense, and I saw this system being rolled out, and if I see a poorly designed product or service, I immediately ask, okay, what kind of organization does this? What in the organization has triggered them to launch this, to make it like this, etc. So I became curious. After my defense, I set up this 3 graduation students together, and we approached the ministry and said, this is a really crappy service. You're getting a lot of backlash on it from politics, in the media, from the audience, from general public. And we have this knowledge in the Netherlands. We're one of the countries with really good user experience capabilities, companies, and universities. So we set up research to study in the field what were the aspects that was wrong. And a lot of these issues have been now solved over the years. We're now 10 years later. When you first bought a personalized OV chip card that you need to put subscriptions on it, you would have to wait for 2 weeks. people did not know. There was not a single website where you could find it and order it. When it came in the mail, you had to activate it. But if you order it through the website of the Dutch National Railways, you could activate it at a NS, Dutch National Railways ticket machine. If you did not order it from NS, you could only activate it at one of these little yellow machines at the Albert Heijn. Yeah. Then you would have to activate it. Then you had to put your subscription on the. It was pure horror. The whole thing was for. And if you would then, if you would have bought your OV chip card from Amsterdam Municipal Transport, you could use it in a train, but you had to put a product on it, which was called Traveling with NS, and you had to have to buy that online and put it on the card. If you would stop a subscription from NS, for example, you would stop the subscription, then you would have to go to a tick machine and get the product, stop your subscription. And another issue was that we compared the OV chip card to London and Hong Kong. And interestingly, a lot of people said, "Oh, we should have copied the system from Hong Kong." Interestingly, we did. The back office was initially a 100% copy, and then it was added and changed. The difference between Hong Kong and the Netherlands is we have more transport agencies and one really and more travel products, which makes it subscriptions, etc., etc. And we have a semi-open system. London and Hong Kong are really easy. You can't forget to check out because it's a gated system, and it has always been that way. So even before the Oyster card, London was a closed system. Even before the Octopus card, Hong Kong was a closed system. They had turnstiles and they had magstripe cards. So here in the Netherlands, they wanted to close off stations and put these validators in vehicles, and there are now 90 stations closed off. And those turnstiles, those gates, are really user-friendly because you cannot forget to check out. And people are really bad at remembering a task that they have to do in the future. This is why we make shopping lists. Yeah. Because
and of course the stations are filled with impulses that make us forget that we're actually traveling.
Yeah. You buy a sandwich, etc. So this the Travelers Society of the Netherlands. At first they said, "We don't want those gates," and I just went to them and said, "No, you do. You do want the gates. You do want the gates. Don't ask for more gates. More gates is good." And they're like, "What? You can't forget. This is going to be." And one of the big complaints was forgetting to check out, and solving missed checkouts. If you did forget to check out, and you have to remember people didn't have these routines in the Netherlands because we didn't have gates. They would have to fix their missed checkout with each individual transport operator. So I had to figure out with which transport operator was I traveling. You have to go to their website. Everyone had different rules. So now, like you said, people have gone accustomed. They have routines, but really a lot of improvements have been made. And that brings us to Don Norman and Roberto Fraganti again. Making a big meaning or technology change can prevent if you do that user-centeredly, you don't get a backlash. And the OV chip card is a really good example. The level of satisfaction we have now could have been there much earlier, and we could have better adoption.
I could imagine when we talked earlier, we talked about sort of the architects who want you to feel the bad stairs, or the Philip Stark designer who doesn't want a juicer to be a juicer, but an object of art that is a conversation piece. So I
usually have the idea that a lot of these stories emerge in retrospect as soon as.
So maybe one of those transporters could sort of tell a story. I want you to feel how it is to travel. And feel the different products that you're getting from different transporters.
That it's not normal that ICT always works and etc.
So maybe that's the trick.
An interesting thing was that we had two goals. We wanted to improve the system, and we did that. So and we gave a lot of recommendations. Some of them you see now actually being implemented in the system, and for the students that worked on it. So the first generation was Geert Niemeyer, Thijs Nix, Johanna Jopien, and they now all in practice, but they actually see the stuff that they
don't see their graduation project, but they see tiny things.
Yeah, and we can't
claim
them because but you see a lot of the stuff we gave as advice, and you see that emerging later on, and that's really a satisfying experience. And then the transport operators approached us and said, "Okay, you did a lot of work on how the system is and helped us improve it, but now can we look at the future? What's going to happen when bank cards enter the system? What's going to happen when mobile phones start entering the system? And then we said, okay, let's set up a new product, and it became even bigger this time. And so basically what I did with these students, I always said, you're going to go into the field. We're going to do a long graduation project, a longer than usual. So bring in an elective course and etc. I'm going to fix that for you so that you have time and depth, and they could do field studies in the Netherlands, but they could also always pick 2 or 3 countries where there were comparable systems. So the student who worked on mobile ticketing, Shen Kao Cheng, and that was really an amazing story because everyone thought mobile ticketing is going to be the thing. Mobile ticket, everyone always over chip.
On your mobile phone, right?
Why can't I use my mobile phone to check in? Not on your why can't I check in? Just bleep. And the company said, well, maybe we have to investigate this. They were already working on. They had a prototype service, and that was soon to be rolled out. And then so my phone is going. Can edit this out, right?
Sure.
So we said, okay, let's investigate this. Let's go to, first we had one student who did an elective, and she studied online which systems are there, and we identified 3 or 4 that were really interesting to study. One in Oslo, Ruter, which had basically a ticket machine on your phone. They opened all the gates, and basically...
Oh, you could sort of remotely open a gate?
No. They just stopped having gates, opened them up, and instead of using a OV chip card or anything, you do it on your phone. You could say a ticket for today or for the whole week, etc., etc. And they would check it with a picture of the day or an animation. 50% of the tickets in Oslo at the time were sold through this app, and it was amazing because they used about 1,250 or 1,500 participants in developing this really user-friendly app. Was really popular. Not really usable for the Dutch system because we also have gates that you have to open, but the insights from that were really interesting. Then you went to London, where you could put a virtual bank card on your phone. Yeah. You could put it on your phone in Apple Pay, etc., and then you could scan it with. And after 3 days, he sent me an app saying, Jasper, it's, I can't find anyone using it. No one's using it. At the time, I think about 30% of the people were using a bank card instead of Oyster card. Yeah. What you have to remember is that London has a really simple tariff system. They have just same tariff, peak, off-peak, and then there's zones, but there are no travel products, etc. complex. And so it's basically as easy to use your bank card as an Oyster card. So by now, it's already 50% using the bank card. But this virtual bank card on the phone, at the time, he couldn't find anyone. So he started looking at different stations. And at one point, he found a station where he could actually, so he would wait behind the gate line. And if someone emerged using their phone, he would jump on them and go, can I ask you something? Why are you using this? And he had an interview with the guy. And he said, so he asked him, so you used a virtual bank card. Why are you using this? And the guy said, no ID, mate. I have no idea why I'm using this. I'm purely subject to the advertising. It's actually pretty crappy. I have no idea why this service exists. But it's, it's so innovative.
He's like me.
Yeah, but then he started looking, and it turns out that checking out with your virtual bank card takes 3 times as long as checking out with your Oyster card. And it's more unreliable. You have to identify with your fingerprint. So actually, the user experience of using this was really low. It was just not good enough. And that people sort of are like water. They float to the point of least resistance in terms of user experience. So then we learned that, or Shen learned that from London. And then he went to Seoul, where, as it turned out, since 2010, you could check in with your mobile phone, and 35% of the phones were Samsung phones equipped with open NFC channels and the right SIM card, 35%. So he stood next to a gate line to check how many people did it.
Using it?
1 out or 2 out of 100. Since 2010, 35, and he started asking people, and here again, it was the reliability of checking in. It was not really reliable, and people just told him, they said, we have T-Money, the what do you call it, the smart card system for public transport there. It's on our credit card, so we don't need to top up. And topping up is one of the things that why it's really nice to have your mobile phone. So we preferred to use the credit card, more reliable, easier. And then he came back and he thought, okay, is this a valuable proposition? Is this a proposition that anyone wants? So it turned out from going, everyone wants this whole technophilia idea, I want to check in on mobile. And then you start looking, what do people want?
If you would ask 500 people, would you want to check in using your mobile phone? They would all say yes. Yeah. And then you only need to find 3 people to find out that it's not really what's going to happen.
Well, the thing is, was observing it in practice was really valuable. And then he started thinking, okay, what do people want? And he started developing options for the Netherlands. Where could we go? What are strategies? Could we use the Oslo strategy, open all gates? Could we use the Seoul strategy with SIM cards? Or should we do something with QR codes, et cetera, developed strategies, showed that to people, got feedback, and then he designed actually the service, and in a final user test, he made a movie that stopped at times, and he would, for example, you would receive an envelope. The movie would be, you are now on the couch and relaxing, and you hear the letterbox, and so and he would give you a letter, and it would be your new OV chip card, and you could scan it with the app, and it would immediately be in the phone. So he tested. What I really liked about this,
the onboarding sort of
onboarding, but all the parts of the customer journey. What you usually see is that if people test the customer journey, it's either really abstract, so at a really high level, this is what it should look like, or it's the separate touch points. He integrated that. He gave you the flow and the touch points, how they're connected, how it would be to experience the whole service. What the basis of his premise was that people don't necessarily want to check in with their phone. They want to have all services on their phone and information on their phone and feedback on their phone, but checking in with a card is fine. Yeah. So, and he presented that to people, and we tested it with a standardized scale for usability, the SUS score, and it had a score of 95, which is beyond excellent, and it's the highest score that I ever saw. And he also had movies with participants saying, I don't understand why this isn't there yet. Yeah. And we now see also services that have aspects of it being rolled out. What I really liked about his projects, by looking at how do people use, first you think it's checking in with your phone. No, it's not. It's
checking your check-in.
That and he said in the near future there might be people who want to check in with their phone, because it has huge advantages. For example, if you're an international visitor and you don't need to buy a separate card, your onboarding is much faster, and the first days you can travel. And maybe in the future, when we don't have any bank cards at all, it might be really nice to not have to have an extra card. But we also saw a lot of users who said, no, I like this extra separate card. I don't want to use my phone, privacy issues, et cetera, et cetera.
So that's one of those recommendations that might sort of find their way to not to the public transports in general.
Well, the nice thing here is that we were before system development. We were able to give inputs, and the similar process happened for the bank card, where they said, well, we're going to copy the London system. We were like, no. We did this 10 years ago. Don't do this again. Let us go to London. Let us go to Chicago, where they also have such a system, and we'll see. And we had some really identified some deal breakers for the Netherlands.
So basically you advised them not to innovate, and they followed you on.
No. We did advise them to innovate, but
on the
how.
Yeah.
So I think that in the famous golden circle, what, how, why.
Yeah.
Very often innovation is on what. What do we need to do? We need smart card systems. No, the question is also how. How do we want mobile ticketing, and why do we want it like that? And if you can answer those 2 questions, has a much bigger contribution to a successful and accepted innovation than if you just focus on what.
You have a column in the Volkskrant, which is a great way to sort of popularize what we're doing. It's called How Hard Can It Be, basically, right? And you take a couple of examples, and I really like the one. So did you find an alarm clock for yourself?
Yeah, no, not yet. I got a lot of recommendations. So one of the columns I wrote, it was about why are there only crappy alarm clocks on the market? I don't want a round alarm clock that rolls off my night table when I hit it. I want a really big button on the top from which I can see that it's on or off, and that it can push down or snooze, etc. I want the hands need to be luminescent. And I sort of demands, and this was one of the most popular columns that I did ever. Got a really lot of response, and I was like, oh, yeah, apparently people have the same issue.
Yeah.
But there were a couple of suggestions.
So what are you going for?
Well, there was a suggestion about the Lexon flip on-off alarm clock, which is sort of a digital, you flip it completely. It's really clear that it's on and off, it's good light, but I really would like an analog, really just a simple good analog alarm clock for about 35 euros. But even the old brown alarm clocks, which were really good, are now manufactured by some other company somewhere else. And if you look at the reviews, they're crap.
Yeah.
So the same design, but crappy. The one where you could shout.
the energy,
voice activated. The voice activation doesn't work anymore, and the battery compartment comes off. And then I'm like, oh. I thought that was really sad. That even if you're at this time prepared to pay 45 euro for a really high, what used to be a famous brand, a good design alarm clock, that it's still crap.
Yeah, but you could of course get it from Marktplaats for.
20 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
You could wonder
Sustainable consumer behavior.
I know, but you could wonder how well it will hold up in the coming years. But I think that's one of the really sad issues of this time, is that it's become so easy to produce things that we're no longer used to pay for good design if it's cheaply produced. Basic things with a high quality. It used to be that you could make something basic like an alarm clock, but it would be expensive to make it, so the design effort was a relatively small part of the total price.
Yeah, because it was produced in
limited amounts, or not in China, etc., etc. What you see now is that production prices have gone down, so that people think like, why is this alarm clock 45 euros? Because I can get one for €3.50 as well. So what you see is that everything is converging on the low price, low quality thing.
Yeah, because then there's the bigger thing that's behind your need for a clock in your bedroom is because you don't want your phone in your bedroom anymore, right?
No, right.
And is that sort of a restraint for yourself, or is that a, yeah?
Yeah, I'm not really.
Because your phone is not crap, right?
My phone is good.
Yeah.
I just don't want to use it as an alarm clock because I can't see the time straight away when I wake up. I just from my, corner of my eye, and I am not so comfortable with having my phone with me. I start looking at Netflix. Instead of reading a book, and I've noticed that I'm calmer when I sleep, when I read a book before I sleep instead of looking on my phone. My head switches off earlier and easier. And
so we're also making good products that sort of don't make us function well, right?
Some of the products, I mean, the smartphone is just really, really, really addictive. And I was discussing this with my wife recently, and I said, well, if I would have the opportunity right now to push a switch that would make all the smartphones in the world disappear, I would do it. I don't see the added value of smartphones. Or let me put it this way, I see the downside, I think, is by now becoming bigger than the upside. Yeah. Which is a pretty depressing thought.
Would you also, that's very depressing, because would you also say that about the internet as a whole?
No.
No? Because that's
but
social media?
I think the nice thing is that philosophers of technology then argue, but we've always been afraid of new technologies, Yeah. Socrates was afraid of paper because it would reduce our capability to remember things. The steam engines, trains, would suck up our soul if we went over 40 kilometers an hour, and etc. But the thing is, what if this time it's true? That it wasn't true before doesn't mean that it's not true now. The thing is, the speed at which technology develops is exponentially. It's faster than ever. So there might be a point where we can't keep up anymore, where it's becoming more than we can handle. Maybe it's not, but maybe it is. I think
maybe you're just getting old.
And even in that, and then people say, but we'll adapt. Yeah, okay, but to what?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest questions right now is what's the role of technology? What makes us human? It's the really big questions coming up.
So with that cliffhanger, I just want to sort of put an end to our talk. The only thing is, I asked you, I don't know if you've received that, so I like to end it off with a tip for people to either read, consume, watch, sort of a... I have a tip that I can share, and then if you have a tip, you're more than welcome to. So do you want to start, or shall I start?
Yeah, the series Abstract on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
Really awesome series, more about design as authorship, but it's very nice portraits of famous and not so famous designers in various disciplines like sneaker design, graphic design. And the filmography is awesome. So it's
the filmography,
how it's filmed. Yeah.
So I wanted to look at it. I've not been able to finish it because it was too much sort of fashion and style to my sense.
True, but that's also really nice. I mean, if you once you accept the fact that it's more fashion as or design as styling than design as solutions, then it's still a really nice series.
Yeah, because the nice thing is that if I look at at the designs that came out of, for example, the OV payment labs, I sometimes think, it would be nice if there would be a little bit more sort of to the textures and sort of more attention to details in that way. So I was so I was missing that. So I sort of think, why am I? So it's strange that I sort of criticized in my thinking the projects that came out of that, whereas I don't like to watch series.
The thing is that with our designs in what we did for the OV chip card, the basic design was really the interaction design, like asking what is a payment border, what is paying with your mobile phone, and then a UI concept was developed, but it was by no means mature.
No.
Yeah.
So
but that really, I mean, I really appreciate good visual design, good styling, and I think that's a really important quality also for design students.
The way it feels, the way it makes
attention to
sound.
detail.
Very nice. So, and then I have a book that I want to share. So I've been reading Ken Koshenda's book. It's called Creative Selection, and he was the one that made the keyboard on the iPhone. Right. And he basically talks about that. But he's really a programmer who's like a new person in the world of design, and he's really awkward in the way he talks about design, and it's really cute.
It's sort of fascination that you have.
Well, he's like a fascinated. Oh, it's so funny how they design, and so and then I sort of read him. Sort of, he takes these lessons that are so mundane, but he really because he's from the outside, so it's really like Alice in Wonderland, Alice in Designland. Yeah. And the book even has illustrations in it that are really nice, that sort of talk about the situations he was in. So you see sort of from his perspective or over his shoulder, drawn illustrations of him presenting his first designs to Steve Jobs, for example, but also to Phil Schiller. And he talks about how he got his products out. And it's really, it talks about, there are some very bad things, sort of very things that I would say I would never want to work in such an organization, but it really tells a great story from the inside, from that era which we don't know anything about.
I think that the interesting thing about Apple is that making really great products can be no fun at all.
Yeah, there's no joy.
It can be really tough. I think that a lot of people mix that up, that making great products is fun. Yeah. I think sometimes it's your boss looking over your shoulder telling you to go another way. It's making 80-hour work weeks, etc., etc. I think usually the fun comes after 5 years when you see your product is really landed and has attracted a huge following.
Yeah, no, but you noticed, so there's guerrilla stuff in there. And that's where they had the fun, but you really find out that this is hell.
Yeah,
basically hell.
It is.
Same hell as OV chip cards. So with that, I want to thank you for this talk. And I want to thank Mark de Kool, our producer, and Geraldo Solisa. And we hope to put a next issue out as soon as possible. If you want to talk back to us, you can reach me a.i.keller@tudelft.nl, and we really appreciate your feedback. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.